Close your eyes for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out. The world around you begins to quiet. The hum of modern life softens, and in its place, another world begins to take shape. Tonight, we travel back to the Viking Age, not to the world of warriors and raiders, but to the quieter, harsher, and far more ordinary world that existed behind them. The world of those who stayed, the farmers, herders, and fishermen who kept the heart of Norse life beating while others sailed into legend. You've heard the stories of Viking conquest, the sagas filled with thunder, iron, and glory, but history is rarely made by those who shout the loudest. More often, it belongs to those who simply endure, the ones who wake before the dawn, work until dusk, and fall asleep to the same winds that their ancestors did centuries before. This is their story, a slower, simpler rhythm of existence, a world of long winters, quiet resilience, and lives spent in close conversation with the land itself. As you listen, let your thoughts drift with the sound of the wind. Feel the weight of the cold, the comfort of firelight, the ache of hands made strong by work. This is not a tale of adventure, but of endurance. The soft, unending effort to survive another day beneath the northern sky. Now breathe in once more. The air is sharp, the world is still, and the year is around 950 AD. The soil beneath your feet is frozen, and your day is about to begin. The morning begins in silence. Inside the longhouse, the air is thick with the faint smoke of the dying hearth fire. You can hear soft movements, the rustle of wool blankets, the shifting of animals that share your home. Goats and sheep breathe in quiet puffs, their warmth mixing with the scent of hay and damp earth. The walls are dark, made from timber and turf, their surfaces rough to the touch. You pull on your cloak and step outside. The heavy wooden door groans open, and a rush of icy air greets you like an old adversary. The landscape before you feels endless, a stretch of uneven fields bordered by forests that fade into mist. The air smells of salt, soil, and smoke. It's beautiful, but in the way that loneliness can be beautiful. Wide, empty, and unforgiving. Being a Viking farmer is not a life of adventure. It's a life of repetition. The same tasks, season after season, the same fears, the same hopes. You live not by ambition, but by rhythm. The slow turn of the earth, the endless circle of work and rest. In spring, you labor to bring the land back to life. The soil is heavy and cold, reluctant to yield to your wooden plow. You drive your oxen forward, your boots sinking into the thawing mud. Each furrow feels like a small victory against the earth itself. By evening, your shoulders ache, your hands sting with blisters, and yet there is satisfaction in this quiet battle. Summer is kinder, but also cruel in its own way. The days are long, so long that the sun barely dips below the horizon. The light lingers, soft and pale, as if the world has forgotten how to sleep. You work beneath that endless sun, tending to barley, cabbage, and rye, always aware that every hour wasted now will cost you dearly when winter comes. Autumn arrives like a whisper that turns into a warning. The winds grow colder, sharper. You move through the fields quickly, cutting, drying, salting, every motion a race against time. You store fish, hang herbs, and stack wood until there's no room left to move. You know what's coming. Winter, when the snow finally falls, it erases the boundaries of your world. The paths vanish, the fields disappear beneath white silence. Inside the longhouse, light flickers across faces made pale by cold and exhaustion. The food you stored must last for months, and so every meal is careful, measured. Bread made of barley and oats, thin broth with dried fish, goat's milk, when you have it. Days blur together, time loses shape. The only sound outside is the wind, a constant low howl that feels almost alive. Inside, you find small ways to keep the mind steady. You mend tools, spin wool, carve wooden figures to pass the hours. Children play in the shadows by the firelight. Someone hums a slow tune, something older than memory itself. Life here is not easy, but it is full of texture. You feel the weight of every hour. You taste the cold in every breath. You learn that comfort is not luxury, it's survival. The warmth of fire on your hands, the sight of smoke rising from your roof, the simple act of waking to another day. These are victories. But the North does not forgive easily. Crops fail, animals die, and when they do, there are no second chances. Hunger becomes a quiet companion, one you learn to ignore. You trade when you can, barter when you must, and hope that the gods, whoever they are paying attention. Faith is woven into the fabric of your days. You whisper to Freya for a good harvest, to Thor for safety from storms, to Odin for wisdom in hard times. The gods are not distant. They live in the world around you, in the rumble of thunder, the flicker of lightning, the quiet pulse of the earth beneath your feet. Sometimes you leave small offerings, a carved piece of bread, a drop of ale, not out of fear, but out of habit, out of respect. And through it all, the rhythm continues. Wake, work, eat, wait, sleep. The days pass slowly, but the years pass fast. Children grow taller, fields grow tired. You repair the same roof that your father once did, and still you endure. Because that's what this life demands. Quiet endurance, one season at a time. There are moments of stillness that make it worth it. A sky streaked with green light, dancing across the horizon like spirits in motion. The sound of a river thawing in early spring. The warmth of a hand beside you in the dark. These are not luxuries, they are anchors. The reminders that beauty, even here, still exists. Outside, the wind begins to ease. You step out once more, feeling the frozen earth soften beneath your boots. The ice is breaking. The air carries a new scent, faint, wet, alive. You look up at the hills where snow has begun to retreat, and you know that the wheel has turned once again. Another winter survived, another beginning. The life of a Viking farmer is not glorious. It's hard, cold, and unrelenting, but it's also steady. And in that steadiness lies a kind of peace, a peace that comes not from ease, but from the quiet knowledge that you have faced the worst, and yet you are still here. The hearth burns brighter tonight, the land rests, and you, the silent keeper of this world, can finally rest too. The sea has always had a voice, a low, endless whisper, both promise and warning. To live as a Norseman was to live in constant dialogue with it. You could hear it in the wind that swept over the fjords, in the creak of the longships moored along the shore, in the way every story seemed to end with the same word, the sea. For many, that voice meant fear, the uncertainty of waves, storms, and distant lands. But for some, it spoke differently. It called. And among those who listened was a man named Leif Erikson. Leif was born into that rhythm of wind and salt, sometime around the year 970 AD. He grew up in Greenland, a land that felt less like a home and more like a test. The earth was thin, the winters long, and every meal was earned through endurance. But Leif came from a family that did not fear the unknown. His father, Erik the Red, had been exiled from Iceland after a violent dispute, and it was he who had led settlers across the ocean to claim the icy edges of Greenland. From birth, Leif was raised in the shadow of exile and exploration. He learned early that survival sometimes meant leaving everything behind. Imagine him standing by the shore one evening, the sky streaked with pale gold, the waves lapping against the stones. The wind carries the scent of fish and seaweed, and the faint sound of oars in the distance. He watches the horizon, where the line between sea and sky fades into a single uncertain grey. Beyond that, he has heard, lies something more. Stories drift among sailors, rumors of land far to the west, where forests grow thick and the air is soft with warmth. Some dismiss them as drunken dreams told beside firelight. Others whisper them like prayers. But Leif listens. He feels something stir, that quiet restlessness that comes to those who have seen too much stillness. His decision to sail west isn't born from greed or glory. It's curiosity, a desire to see what lies beyond the familiar line of the world. In a time when most men feared the edge of the map, Leif wanted to find it. He gathers a small crew, men accustomed to cold, wind, and uncertainty. Their longship, carved from oak and sealed with tar, is both fragile and fearless. Before dawn, they push from the shore, their oars dipping into the dark water. The coast of Greenland fades slowly into mist. The journey is long and uncertain. Days stretch into weeks. The sea is both companion and enemy, calm one moment, furious the next. The sky shifts endlessly, silver, grey, violet. Gulls follow for a time, then vanish. The men speak little, their faces drawn and pale beneath the salt air. Leif stands near the bow, his eyes always fixed forward. He doesn't know exactly where he's going, only that something must be there. You can almost hear the rhythm of the oars, the slow splash of wood against water. The ship moves steadily, like a heartbeat in the vast stillness. The sea breathes around them, a living thing, older than memory. Then one morning the air changes. It smells different, green, alive. The breeze carries warmth, faint but unmistakable. Birds reappear, circling low over the waves. And then, just as the mist begins to lift, someone shouts, "Land!" At first, it's only a line, soft and dark against the horizon. But as they draw closer, it grows clearer. A coastline thick with trees, their leaves glinting in sunlight. Streams shimmer like silver threads through the forest. The men stare in silence. They have reached what no one else has, a new world. Leif calls it Vinland, the land of wine, because of the wild grapes found there, and because the name itself carries warmth. They explore cautiously, setting up small shelters, moving through the forest with wonder. The air feels heavier, full of life. The soil is rich, soft beneath their boots, unlike the frozen earth of Greenland. For days, they wander quietly, marking the land, tasting its fruit, drinking from clear streams. They find no familiar gods here, no carved idols or runestones, only the vast hush of wilderness. At night, they sit by their fires, listening to the sounds of unfamiliar creatures, the wind moving through trees that seem to whisper secrets. Leif keeps a small piece of wood from one of those trees, a reminder that the world is larger and gentler than he'd been told. He stays for a season, maybe longer, then sails home, bringing stories of this new place. But when he returns to Greenland, life continues as before. The same winds, the same frost, the same endless cycle. Not everyone believes him. Some call his discovery luck, others folly. But it doesn't matter. Leif is not a man of legend to himself. He is simply a traveler who followed the sea's voice and found something at its edge. He never returns to Vinland. No one truly knows what became of him in the end. He fades quietly from the sagas, as so many real men do, leaving behind only a handful of words and a rumor of a land. And yet, there's something soothing in that ending, the way history often softens into mystery. His journey wasn't about conquest or wealth or glory. It was about curiosity, about reaching the limit of what is known and touching the silence beyond it. Imagine standing where he once stood, looking out across that same sea, the one that still whispers, still calls. You can almost feel the same pull in your chest, that faint ache to see what lies beyond the familiar. The waves move with slow, patient rhythm. The sky above is wide and pale. Somewhere, perhaps, the wind carries his name, not shouted in triumph, but whispered softly, like a sigh carried through time. The sea always remembers those who listen, and Leif Erikson listened. Centuries later, others would follow the same path, searching, wandering, settling, until the map of the world was no longer blank. But some journeys end not with discovery, but with silence. In our next chapter, we'll visit the places the Vikings left behind, The quiet ruins hidden beneath ice and earth. Traces of lives once lived, now almost erased. A mystery of loss and of time. The North remembers quietly, not with voices or monuments, but with ruins, half buried under snow, half swallowed by time. If you travel far enough north, past the last of the green hills, and into the silence of the ice, you might stumble upon them. Stone walls, collapsed roofs, whale bones laid in circles, once marking the boundaries of a home. They sit now in a cold stillness so deep that even the wind seems hesitant to disturb it. These are the remnants of the Norse settlements of Greenland, communities that once thrived at the very edge of survival. They were built by the descendants of men like Erik the Red and Leif Erikson, people who believed that through will and faith they could carve a life out of the frozen wilderness. For a while they did, and then one day they were gone. No one knows exactly how or why the Norse vanished from Greenland, but the silence they left behind is almost louder than any story that could be told. Imagine standing where they once stood. The air bites at your skin, sharp and pure. The light is blinding, a cold white that stretches endlessly. Around you, nothing but the sound of your own breath, the soft crunch of snow beneath your boots, and the faraway echo of waves striking ice. Once, this was a village. You can almost see it. The low wooden houses covered in turf to hold the heat, smoke rising lazily from narrow chimneys. The smell of seal fat burning in the hearth, the muffled laughter of children in thick wool cloaks. Inside each home, people moved quietly, tending to the daily rhythm of life. Carving, weaving, mending nets, whispering prayers. And then, slowly, something changed. The climate grew colder. The sea that once brought food and trade began to freeze earlier each year. The grass that fed their animals grew sparse. The soil, already poor, hardened into frost. The isolation became unbearable. Ships from Iceland and Norway stopped arriving. The church bells that once rang across the valley grew silent. Even the graves, small mounds marked with simple crosses, began to disappear beneath drifting snow. Some believe they starved. Others think they simply left, their longships creaking into the fog, seeking a softer world that no longer existed. But there are no records. No final message carved into stone, only fragments of pottery, iron tools, a broken comb, a child's toy carved from bone. Archaeologists sift through the frozen ground, their gloves stiff with cold, brushing centuries of silence from each discovery. Every object tells a story, not of conquest or kings, but of endurance, of people who refused to yield even when the world itself turned against them. One site, known as Brattahlid, was once the home of Erik the Red. His hall stood on a small rise overlooking the fjord, its walls of timber and turf thick enough to keep out the winter wind. The ruins still stand there, low and weathered, surrounded by grass that never grows high. Inside, archaeologists found remnants of imported cloth and bronze, signs that these settlers once traded with Europe. But as time went on, the imports stopped. So did the iron, the salt, the grain, and with them, hope. There's something haunting about the thought, not of their suffering, but of their fading. The Norse were gone. No bones, no battles, no graves freshly turned. Only the cold foundations of houses like ghosts pressed into the earth. Scientists today still argue over what happened. Was it famine, disease, conflict with the Inuit, or simply the weight of centuries of isolation? But perhaps the truth is simpler. Perhaps they just ran out of warmth. Every civilization that disappears leaves behind the same trace, not a scream, but an echo, a stillness that stretches through time. The Norse settlements of Greenland remind us of that silence, a kind of quiet that feels almost sacred. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the last family standing in their doorway as the snow begins to fall again. The animals are gone, the ships too. The fjord is frozen, a solid mirror reflecting the pale sky. They hold hands, perhaps whispering a prayer, perhaps nothing at all. Then they step forward and into the white. The snow covers their footprints before the day is done. Centuries later, explorers rediscovered those ruins. They found fragments of runes carved into stone, brief messages, often undecipherable, half erased by ice. One reads simply, "We were here, that's all." No dates, no names. Just a quiet insistence that they lived, that they mattered, that the world once reached this far north. Even now, those stones remain. The wind moves through them like breath, and in that sound, soft, hollow, endless, it's almost as if you can still hear the whisper of the people who built them. Their silence is not empty. It's memory. Imagine the glow of firelight flickering across polished wooden walls. The scent of roasted meat, smoke, and honeyed ale drifts through the air, blending with the low murmur of voices and the occasional burst of laughter. Long tables stretch down the length of a great hall, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of feasts. Carved beams curve above, each one ending in the silent snarl of a dragon's head, its hollow eyes catching the light of the flames. Outside, the world lies locked in ice and darkness, but inside there is warmth, the kind that feels almost sacred. This was the dream of the Norse people. Valhalla, the hall of the slain, a place where warriors who died bravely in battle were said to awaken after death, whole again, ready to fight by day and feast by night. It was not merely a myth, it was a promise. To those who spent their lives battling hunger, cold, and despair, Valhalla offered a vision of eternal warmth and plenty. For many, it was not about glory or violence, but about rest, a paradise imagined by people who had so little of it in life. In truth, most Vikings never sailed to foreign lands or fought in grand raids. They lived quietly as farmers and herders bound to the soil. For them, Valhalla was less a destination and more a dream. A soft hope whispered during the longest nights that somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond death itself, there was a hall where no one froze, no one starved, and no one was alone. But even among the living, glimpses of that dream could be found in the great longhouses of chieftains and jarls, where torches burned late into the night, feasts were held that mirrored the glory of the gods. Picture it now, a high seat at the center of the hall where the jarl sits draped in furs, his arm heavy with silver rings. Beside him his wife, dignified and silent, her gown glinting with beads of glass and amber. The air hums with quiet reverence as a skald steps forward, the poet, the memory keeper, and begins to sing. His voice is low and steady, carrying stories of gods and heroes, of Odin and Thor, of long battles fought and ancient oaths sworn beneath the northern sky. The people listen, not because they believe every word, but because in those words they feel something alive, a shared heartbeat, a link to a past that gave meaning to their hardships. The hall feels alive. Torches sway and crackle, shadows shift and merge on the walls, and the rhythmic thud of cups meeting the table seems to mark the passing of time. The mead flows freely, golden and thick, and laughter rises like smoke, curling toward the rafters. Servants move carefully between benches, refilling cups, clearing plates, and laying new platters of roasted fish, bread, and cheese. The warmth presses close, soft and heavy, and for a little while, it feels as though the winter outside does not exist. But even in this world of feasting and laughter, tension lingers like a shadow. The hall is not only a place of joy, it is also a stage for pride, power, and politics. One misplaced word, a poorly timed toast, or a gaze that lingers too long can shift the air from warmth to unease. You can almost feel it. The sudden silence, the fire's crackle growing sharper, the jarl's eyes narrowing as he decides whether the night will end in peace or blood. Yet just as quickly, the tension fades. A laugh cuts through the stillness. The poet begins another song and the moment passes. That was the rhythm of Viking life. A delicate dance between honor and danger, laughter and fear. At the heart of every feast was belief, belief that to share food and mead was to affirm life itself. Even the poorest farmer understood the power of hospitality, of sitting together beneath one roof while the wind howled outside. To feast was to remind each other that they still lived, that they still endured, that the world had not yet taken everything from them. And in that way, Valhalla was not so distant after all. It was not a fantasy, but a reflection, a mirror of what they long for most. Warmth after cold, abundance after famine, peace after struggle. When the Norse spoke of warriors feasting forever in Valhalla, they were not glorifying battle. They were imagining rest, the kind that comes after a lifetime of labor, when the tools are laid down and the fire burns quietly. For the farmers, the shepherds, the fishermen, Valhalla was less about swords and glory, and more about comfort, companionship, and the ending of pain. It was, in its own quiet way, a dream of home. As centuries passed, the sagas softened, and the old gods faded from the world. Christianity came, and the great halls fell silent, their timbers collapsing into earth and grass. Yet the old stories lingered, whispered by the wind that swept across the fjords. If you stand today among the ruins of a Viking longhouse, low walls of stone, a hearth long cold, you might still feel a trace of that warmth. You might hear, faintly, the echo of laughter, the hum of a forgotten song, the soft clink of cups raised in remembrance. And so the story comes full circle. From the farmer bending beneath grey skies, to the explorer chasing the edge of the world, to the settlers swallowed by the ice, and finally to the dreamers who built their heaven from hunger and hope. All of it is one rhythm, the slow, steady pulse of human endurance. The Norse lived in a world that demanded everything, and yet they found ways to make beauty, to make meaning, to make warmth. Now as the fire fades and the story nears its end, let the echoes of that distant world fall quiet. The cold wind softens, the hall grows still. The voices of the farmers and the warriors fade into the same silence, leaving only peace. The Norse are long gone, their gods forgotten, their songs nearly lost. But what remains, what always remains, is the heartbeat of humanity, the longing for rest, for warmth, for something gentle after the storm. So breathe deeply now. The snow has stopped falling. The fire burns low. Somewhere far away, the doors of Valhalla swing open, and inside, everything is calm. You have walked through their world, seen their struggles, felt their cold, and now it is time to rest. Let the stories settle. Let your mind drift. In this quiet, you may find your own kind of Valhalla, a place of stillness, of comfort, of sleep. In the stillness of the northern dawn, before the men took to the fields or the sea, it was often the women who first stirred life into the household. Imagine the faint glow of embers breathing in the hearth, their warmth rising against the chill of the timber walls. She moves quietly, her breath visible in the cold air, the rhythm of her work unbroken by words. The scent of smoke and wool fills the longhouse as she kneads dough, made from coarse barley, the kind that sticks to her hands and hardens beneath her nails. Outside, the frost clings to the thatched roof like a second skin, and the world is silent, except for the steady scrape of a wooden spoon against a clay bowl. Viking women lived within narrow boundaries, yet their presence held the household together like invisible thread. They managed the food stores, kept the fires alive, tended the animals, and preserved not only the home, but the very memory of family. Every stitch in a cloak, every loaf of bread, every whispered prayer at night was an act of quiet resistance, a way to defy the endless cold, the hunger, the waiting. When the men sailed away, chasing wealth or glory, it was the women who stood on the shore, faces hidden by the wind, watching until the ships became specks on the horizon. And when storms claimed those ships, it was they who bore the silence afterward. Some women, though, wielded more than patience. The sagas speak of those who commanded their own farms, traded goods, or even wielded blades. There were priestesses known as Volur, women who walked between worlds, speaking prophecies in dimly lit halls while the fire crackled and shadows bent toward them. Their power wasn't loud. It was the kind that drew breath from those who listened. Even in a world built for men, the Norse woman carried the weight of the unseen, the children, the spirits, the gods of the hearth. Yet there was sorrow too. Endless winters carved fine lines into young faces. Grief was a familiar visitor, sitting quietly at the edge of every table. Birth and death often shared the same room, separated only by a curtain of cloth. Still, life went on. Bread was baked, wool was spun, songs were sung softly into the night. The world outside was brutal, but within the longhouse, her hands shaped warmth from the cold, order from the chaos. And when night finally came, she would sit beside the dying fire, the light painting gold across her tired face. She'd listen to the wind pressing against the walls, as if the gods themselves were whispering through the cracks. Perhaps she wondered where her husband was, or if her sons would return from sea. But she did not weep. She simply waited, as the women of the North always did, with quiet strength and unspoken hope, carrying the soul of her world in the silence of her heart. The sea was the first cradle and the final grave for many who called the North home. To the Viking mind, water was both a passage and a promise. The same waves that carried men toward distant lands would one day carry their spirits elsewhere. When death came, it was not feared so much as understood. It was as constant as winter, as patient as the tide. Imagine standing by the shore at dusk. The air is still, the sky dim with drifting clouds that glow faintly pink against the setting sun. A single ship rests on the sand, its hull dark and wet, its sails folded like wings at rest. Around it stand figures cloaked in fur, their faces quiet, lit by the wavering glow of torches. There are no cries, no loud laments, only the slow, methodical movements of hands laying offerings upon the deck. A sword, a carved comb, a drinking horn, a small pouch of silver. Each object holds memory, weight, and meaning. The body lies in the center, wrapped carefully in linen, the hands folded across the chest. Sometimes, if the dead had lived as a warrior or a leader, the ship itself would be their coffin. Others were buried beneath mounds of earth shaped like small hills, the wind forever singing over them. The living believed these souls traveled not down into darkness, but across, over the sea, toward a place unseen yet vividly imagined. Some spoke of Valhalla, the great hall of warriors, where endless feasts awaited beneath golden rafters. Others whispered of quiet meadows or shadowed realms where ancestors gathered around eternal fires. Death rituals were not about the end. They were about continuity. The flame from the pyre rose into the night sky, flickering against the cold air until it merged with the stars. A reminder that even the smallest life left its light behind. The ashes would drift into the soil or scatter over the sea, returning to the cycle that had shaped every generation before. For those left behind, the silence that followed was heavier than grief. The sea itself seemed to mourn, waves folding softly against the shore, each one carrying away a fragment of memory. Long after the last ember cooled, the ship's impression remained on the sand, like a ghost that refused to fade. And still, life continued. The next morning, someone would stoke the hearth again, milk the goats, mend the nets, and whisper a prayer to the gods of both life and death. To the Vikings, dying was not a break in existence, but a return. To the water, to the land, to the stories told in hushed tones beside the fire. And perhaps that is why they lived as they did. Not in defiance of death, but in rhythm with it. Understanding that every voyage, whether across oceans or through life itself, would one day lead back to the same still sea. In the world without paper walls or glowing screens, the Vikings wove their memory into sound. Every story, every lineage, every flicker of faith and fury lived in words carried by the voice. When the wind howled outside and snow buried the fields, the longhouse came alive with the rhythm of recitation, the pulse of history beating softly beneath a roof of smoke and shadow. Imagine the hall at night, the fire burning low, its light dancing on carved beams. The air is thick with the scent of pine resin and roasted meat. A skald, a poet draped in worn wool and pride, steps forward. His voice is low at first, smooth as the sea in summer, then rising with the weight of memory. The people listen, motionless. His words are not mere stories. They are the bloodline of their world. Each name spoken calls forth the ancestors. Each verse reminds them who they are and who they must never forget to be. Their poetry was like their landscape, sharp, vast, and filled with silence between the lines. It told of gods and monsters, of love that endured the cold, of ships swallowed by storms and hearts that refused to break. But it also sang of the ordinary, a farmer's toil, a mother's grief, a shepherd's watch under the aurora's pale light. Every sound mattered, every rhythm carried meaning. In a time when the written word was rare, the spoken one was sacred. Music, too, threaded through their days. Simple flutes carved from bone, harps strung with gut, and drums beaten softly in the dark. The melodies were often slow and haunting, echoing the cadence of waves against wood or the hum of wind through pine forests. These sounds lulled weary minds to rest as much as they stirred the soul. Some songs were lullabies whispered to restless children. Others were chants that guided oarsmen through fog and storm. The north itself seemed to breathe through them, the land, the sea, and the people moving in one shared rhythm. Storytelling was survival. Through words, they kept their dead alive. Through songs, they softened the silence of winter. When a tale ended, it lingered, floating like smoke, sinking into the mind, until it became part of the listener. And even now, centuries later, those same verses hum faintly in the bones of the north, in the crash of the sea, in the whisper of wind over stone. Every story was a bridge, from past to present, from life to death, from silence to sound. And as the fire dimmed, as eyes grew heavy and the Skald's voice faded into the crackle of embers, there was comfort in knowing that memory itself, fragile, fleeting, beautiful, would never truly die. Long before bells tolled in northern valleys, the Vikings spoke to their gods through wind, fire, and silence. Their faith was not bound by walls or scriptures. It was alive in the pulse of the earth, in the crack of thunder, in the gleam of a blade kissed by frost. They did not pray as others would come to pray. They honored, they offered, they whispered, they waited. The old gods were not distant rulers, but kin, flawed, fierce, and familiar. Odin, the wanderer of wisdom. Thor, the protector against chaos. Freya, who wept golden tears for love lost and found. Imagine the stillness of a pine forest just before dawn. A man kneels beside a carved stone, his breath clouding in the cold air. He lays down a small bowl of mead, murmuring thanks for another day survived. Somewhere nearby, the faint sound of a stream echoes like a hymn. Faith for him is not a commandment, but a rhythm, the cycle of life and loss, sowing and reaping, war and winter. The gods do not demand perfection. They ask only that he remember them in the turning of the seasons. But change crept slowly from the south, carried by ships not of raiders, but of missionaries. They came with wooden crosses and strange words, offering peace and salvation in exchange for surrender. At first, the Vikings resisted, not with swords, but with silence. Their world was one of stories and oaths, not absolutes. Yet as trade grew and kingdoms expanded, the old gods began to fade, not in battle, but in memory. Picture a small wooden church rising beside a fjord, its steeple cutting through the fog. Inside, candles flicker, their smoke curling upward like the last prayers of the old world. The hymns sound gentle, almost familiar, their rhythm not unlike the chants once spoken around ancient fires. Many who knelt there still carried Thor's hammer beneath their tunics, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. Old faith and new faith existed side by side for a time, two rivers merging, their waters still cold, still wild. For some, the new faith brought comfort, the promise of forgiveness, the certainty of heaven. These were ideas that softened the edges of a harsh life. For others, it was a quiet grief. The gods of their ancestors had not betrayed them. They had simply grown silent, and in that silence, the people learned to pray differently. Still to something unseen, still to something vast, but now through different names. Even centuries later, the land itself remembers. Stones carved with both crosses and runes still stand in meadows kissed by frost. The wind that sweeps over them seems to hum with two voices, one ancient, one eternal. It is the sound of faith evolving, not dying, of people learning that belief, like the sea, is never still. When we think of Vikings, we imagine blades flashing beneath grey skies, sails red as blood, war cries echoing over stormy seas. But that was only part of the truth. Beyond the myth of raiders and conquerors lived another kind of Viking, the wanderer, the merchant, the explorer who carried the North within him wherever he went. His world was not just carved by the sword, but built by hands that traded, mapped, and learned. Imagine the harbor at dawn, the soft clatter of wooden crates, the gentle lapping of waves against longships moored to the shore. The air smells of salt and pine tar, of wool and dried fish. Men move in silence, their voices low, their movements practiced. They load amber, iron, and furs, bound for lands where the sun feels strange and the language is even stranger. For every warrior who died in battle, a dozen more made their living by steering toward the unknown, guided only by the wind and the shifting stars. They followed the rivers of Russia to the walls of Byzantium, their oars cutting through waters that gleamed like molten silver. They traded in silk and spices, gold and slaves, bringing back treasures and tales that would feed fireside stories for generations. Some even served as guards in foreign courts, Viking men in shining helmets, standing beside emperors in cities filled with marble and prayer. To them, the world was vast, but never unreachable. The horizon was not a boundary, it was an invitation. And yet, the farther they went, the more they carried home within them. Every port, every stranger's face reminded them of their own distant fjords. The quiet ones, wrapped in mist, where their families waited. They were men of movement, yet bound by longing. In markets filled with foreign voices, they would sometimes hum the low tunes of their homeland. Songs about snow, about gods, about the warmth of fire after rain. But travel was not without cost. Many never returned. The sea swallowed ships whole, rivers froze, empires turned to dust. Still, others stayed, settled, and began anew. Their children speaking tongues that blended Norse with Slavic, Frankish, or Arabic words. Their descendants would never see the mountains of their ancestors, yet they would still carry echoes of the old songs, the same patience, the same will to endure. For the Vikings, the world was a web of sea routes and friendships, of enemies and alliances, of faiths and fates intertwined. They were not merely takers, but connectors, shaping a medieval world far more complex than the legends allow. When the sails finally vanished beyond the horizon, they left more than footprints in foreign sand. They left the quiet truth that the North was never just a place. It was a way of moving through the world, fearless, curious, and always listening for the whisper of the wind. Time does not end with thunder. Often it fades softly, like a song losing its last note in the wind. The Viking Age did not collapse in flame or fury. It drifted into silence. One generation after another, the sound of oars faded from the fjords, and the sails that once filled the horizon grew still. The North did not change all at once. It changed like the seasons, quietly, patiently, almost kindly. Imagine a small village near the edge of the sea, centuries after the great voyages had ceased. The longhouse remains, but its walls are gentler now, its timbers polished by time. The air is thick with the smell of peat smoke and the faint sweetness of bread baking in the hearth. Children run between carved doorposts, no longer warriors' sons but farmers' grandchildren. They know the names of saints now, not of gods, but still, when the northern lights shimmer across the sky, their mothers whisper old words, words the church does not teach, but the land remembers. The warriors' graves are covered in moss. Their ships, once proud and fierce, lie buried under earth, their curved ribs holding the soil like the bones of great beasts long forgotten. No one raids anymore. Trade routes have turned into roads, and the sword that once brought honor now hangs quietly on the wall, a relic, not a tool. The men who once rode toward foreign shores now till the same fields their ancestors fought to claim. Their strength has not faded, only softened, reshaped by time into patience, into stillness. But memory lingers. The sagas live on, murmured by the fire on dark winter nights. Grandfathers tell of Odin and Thor, not as gods, but as stories, beautiful, distant and familiar. The old world survives in rhythm, in speech, in the way they still carve wood, still watch the sea with a kind of reverence. The North never forgets what it was. It simply learns to rest. As the centuries pass, even the old names change. The people of the North become Norwegians, Icelanders, Danes, no longer Vikings, but descendants of their endurance. The age of conquest gives way to the age of quiet living, and the frost that once bit into their hands now melts into memory. The long winter is over, and yet, if you walk the cliffs today when the wind is right and the sea is grey with mist, you might still hear it. The faint rhythm of oars, the ghostly hum of old songs carried on the tide. Not loud, not clear, but present. The past never truly leaves. It only becomes gentler with time, like snow settling over stone. The Viking age did not die. It fell asleep, and in its dreams the North still sails.